Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and we're here again today with another great Kentucky episode. With me, I got Gwen Thompson, who is the Executive Director of the Mary Todd Lincoln House in Lexington, Kentucky. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having us on.
Well, thank you for joining us, and we're going to get into some good Kentucky history that people are always interested to talk about. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit about yourself, your Kentucky connection.
Okay. Well, I was born in Owensboro, Kentucky. I'm a seventh generation Kentuckian. About half my childhood was spent outside of Kentucky, though. But I do identify as a proud Kentuckian with deep roots on both sides of my family here in Kentucky. I attended the University of Kentucky for my undergrad, and then I attended graduate school at Murray State. So both my degrees are from Kentucky institutions. Kentucky proud. Born and bred, yeah.
Well, that's great. That's awesome. So we have a true Kentuckian here. So we're gonna go on every word you say as 100% accurate.
Well, I'll do
uh,
my best. I'll do
yeah.
my best.
Well, so when you think about Lincoln, or when you think about Kentucky, Lincoln is one of the probably historical figures that might come to mind. You know, you have Daniel Boone and probably a few others that people are gonna be interested about, but there is definitely a trend in Kentucky that everybody tries to connect to, or every county tries to connect to Daniel Boone or Abraham Lincoln. Mary Todd Lincoln, though, has a very good connection. Where do we start? Where's a good place to start about like just Mary Todd and her connection to Kentucky?
Oh, well, her connections to Kentucky run deep. So she is a descendant of two families that really were among the founding generation here in Kentucky of for those of European descent. Um, so around the time of the American Revolution is when Kentucky was first open for settlers of European descent to head out this direction. And her family, both her Todd side, her paternal side, and her Parker side, that's her maternal side, really were here very, very early on. Her grandfather, Levi Todd, had served in the American Revolution, and he was given land grants as a result of that, became a very large landowner. He was a clerk of our county, both whenever we were part of Virginia and then after we were a state. So her maternal side, Robert Parker, was a surveyor. So they really were among the early European settlers in the region. And her father, Robert, was born here in Lexington right before he became a state. Her mother, Eliza, was also, among the earliest, folks here. So they really were kind of the early settlers, among the early settlers. And they were obviously white and among the most privileged settlers here in Lexington in the early years. So that's the starting point, is that she came from a family that was a Lexington family, but a Kentucky family that was well known, was well established, held positions of power and influence. They really were well respected and well regarded, even at the state level. So this is the family that she is born into. They are a very political family as well. So her grandfather was in politics. Her father, Robert, was a politician and involved in politics. Her stepmother, later on she gains a stepmother, came from a political family. So she came from this political environment and upbringing.
Yeah, and the Todds, like when you get into that early Kentucky history, their names are around in a lot of events. I'm pretty sure Blue Licks. There were some Todds there in that battle, and during what was it? I think McConnell Station. Um, there were some there, and then there was a judge to a Supreme Court judge Todd, and I'm pretty. I mean, they had to be related. I think it was John Todd. I'm not sure, but they probably were related somehow because there was, only so many Todds around, I guess. Um, so yeah, so she had a very big connection to the political realm, obviously. But whenever it comes to, how how did they get connected to how did she get connected to Lincoln? Let's start with that.
Okay, well, we're going to fast forward
Uh-huh.
through all of her childhood and youth to get to her being 21. And she, was growing up here in Lexington. She spent her childhood and youth here. But when she was 21, she left Lexington to go to Springfield, Illinois. And the reason she went to Springfield was she had an older sister, Elizabeth, who also had been born and raised here in Lexington. But Elizabeth married a man named Ninian Edwards, whose family lived in Illinois. And Elizabeth and Ninian met here in Lexington while Ninian was attending Transylvania University. So Transylvania was this early important college, and folks from all over the West, or men from all over the West, attended Transy if they were of privilege to be able to attend college. So that's how Elizabeth and Ninian met. But after they married, they returned to Illinois, where he was from, and eventually settled in Springfield. Interestingly, Ninian was also a politician, and his father had been governor of Illinois, territorial governor of Illinois, became governor later. So Mary Todd Lincoln's sister also married into political family, and that was not the only sister who did so. There was a lot of the women in the Todd family have political connections and married politicians, which I think is very interesting. Anyway, so Elizabeth ends up in Springfield, Illinois, and one by one, she brings her baby sisters up to live with her while they're, young unmarried women. They do the social scene and they find spouses, get married, and settle in Springfield. Ultimately, there are four Todd sisters who do that. So that is where Mary Todd met Abraham Lincoln, was in Springfield, Illinois. Um, she was this, young Kentucky belle. He was a young attorney. He was already active in politics. He had been the junior law partner of John Todd Stewart. That's Mary Todd Lincoln's first cousin.
Ah,
So yeah, because Illinois, settling in Illinois is a lot of Kentuckians end up heading onward the next generation for further west for further opportunity. So Mary's cousin, John Todd Stewart, is one of those who ends up out that way. She has uncles who end up in Missouri. So the Todd family kind of continues onward. So
mhm.
Lincoln at one point served in the state legislature alongside Elizabeth's husband Ninian. So that is how the Lincolns came to meet, was in Springfield, Illinois, and they were actually married at Elizabeth and Ninian's home in Springfield, Illinois, in November of 1842.
Wow. Well, and that's it's well pretty interesting to see that all those sisters kind of did that same routine, but I guess when it's a political family, I guess that might even be expected um, during that time. So you know, jump to her meeting Lincoln, and we kind of know that story for the most part, as far as going to the he becomes president and so forth, and we'll put that aside for now. So how did Mary Todd's upbringing in Lexington kind of influence her? Uh, even into this meeting Lincoln, and then eventually when she gets to Washington, that youth, as you mentioned earlier.
Mhm. So she grew up in a family of power and influence. They were very well off financially. Her father was a politician and a businessman. By the time they lived in the present day Mary Todd Lincoln House, he had a partnership in a very large cotton factory in this county. So it was like a textile mill.
Mhm.
And that's how he probably made most of his wealth. And because of the family's position, Mary Lincoln had a lot of opportunity. And also because her father and stepmother were somewhat liberally minded as it relates to female education. So at this point, we don't have public schools yet in Mary Todd Lincoln's childhood and youth. There are schools that both boys and girls, young men and young women can attend, but they are fee-based schools, and the Todds were in a position where they could afford to educate their children, both the boys and the girls. And Mary Lincoln or then Mary Todd had a very impressive formal education. She ultimately ends up graduating from an academy called Mantell's Academy. They learn all the things that you'd expect of young women in that era, such as dancing, and they have theatricals. They learn French, but they also learn what are still considered somewhat male subjects, such as geography and mathematics. So Mary Lincoln's education puts her among the most well-educated women of her generation. Not necessarily abnormal for women of her class, particularly here in Lexington, but really kind of sets her apart. And if you compare that to Abraham Lincoln's education, and I know you know, I'm sure, that he did not have all of this formal education. He was largely self-taught or homeschooled, if you will. But she had at least 9 or 10 years of formal education, which is quite extraordinary. So her being very well educated, speaking French fluently, I imagine her in the White House really enjoying the opportunity to use her language skills, her French language
Yeah,
skills,
yeah.
in a way that she probably wasn't getting to use them in Springfield, Illinois. Uh, she grew up in this political family, and while women did not have the franchise or the right to vote, that doesn't mean that women were completely uninterested or uninvolved in political conversations. There's certainly plenty of evidence that many women were. So Mary Lincoln grew up in an environment where the family stories are that she liked to sit in on the conversations and hear what was going on about in politics. So she came from that background. Um, she also came from a family that entertained formally other prominent folks. So in this household, in this dining room, um, this particular dining room, of course, the people who would have been serving there were enslaved. Um, the skills that she would have learned observing them, but also learning from her stepmother, Betsy, how to be a hostess, are skills that she would have taken on or did take on with her whenever she was in Springfield. She used those skills to host entertainments in Springfield that sometimes were specifically related to Lincoln's campaigns. And she also would have used her hosting skills on a grand scale as the official hostess of the White House, where the president and first lady were expected to host uh, events, both large parties, dinners, and even more intimate events. So, really, a lot of the skills that she learned here, uh, some of them are very domestic, but are ones that end up being applicable to her role as first lady. Others are more intellectual or political. And while she didn't have personal political power, she was a partner to Lincoln in helping to support his career and advance his career. That was a long answer,
Well,
Jameson.
that's
I'm
good.
sorry.
Well, no, that's good, and that just, brings up more questions to ask. Um, and I just a thing, a side note, like, I always find it so fascinating, the, um, desire or the need back in those days for sure for people to learn second languages. And, it's something that obviously is not really forced out or sought out nowadays in public education. But um, I just always find it so fascinating to know of like these early frontiersmen, these early you know 1860s. I mean, that's when Mary Todd was alive during that they could speak multiple languages, and it's like, why did we stop doing that?
Well, it's interesting too that you mentioned the frontier, because Lexington is unique in that we were at one point the frontier in the founding generation, which would be more like Mary's grandparents and her father and her mother um, and her stepmother. But Lexington was what is referred to as the urban frontier. So very, very early on, uh, we of course always had agriculture, and that was very important. But we had an urban center, Lexington, and that included all of the kind of things you would expect. There's uh, a value for literature. We had a public library very early on, although it was subscription based, and we're talking in the 1790s. You have all sorts of theaters and entertainment. There's a real love of arts and culture. There's very famous portrait artists such as Matthew Jewett, who are operating in Lexington. Famous silversmiths. These are artisans such as Asa Blanchard. Lexington is promoting itself as a place for these folks, these arts and culture folks to come. Of course, I'd be remiss not to mention that we have Transylvania University,
Hmm.
which is um, a very important early institution that still exists today as a center for education of young men. At that time, young men. Now it's coeducational. So Lexington was the frontier, but is unique because it was an urban frontier, which also means that all these things that we were talking about, like related to Mary Todd Lincoln and
Hmm.
like the refinement of her youth, is in part because she grew up in what was called the Athens of the West.
Yeah, yeah, and you gotta throw out Henry Clay, of course, and, there was if you look into Transylvania, the history of it, you just find out how, like, involved or how big of an impact it had because it was bringing in all these specialty, professors and stuff from all over the world to come
Mhm.
and teach and, really put Lexington on the map, and just to ask, I would assume at some point Mary Todd Lincoln and Henry Clay's paths crossed at some point, I guess? Is that documented or anything, or
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Mhm,
So the present day Mary Todd Lincoln House, uh, where she grew up during her, this is where they lived during her teen years, if you will,
mhm,
is only 2.5 miles from Ashland, the Henry Clay estate.
okay.
So 2.5 miles down the road. And the school that she attended in her teen years, Mentel's, is across the street from Ashland.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but also the Clay family, the Todd family, they are the blue bloods. They are among the elites of Kentucky, not just Lexington. And all of these families were interconnected. It's so interconnected. You can just draw strings of intermarriages and connections. But the most important connection, of course, is that Henry Clay was a politician. He was the leader of the Whig Party at the national level. Mary Todd's father, Robert Smith Todd, was a Whig politician. So he was a supporter of Henry Clay. They attended all kinds of events together. Henry Clay would have been a personal guest here in this house. There is an existing letter of Mary's stepmother where she's writing that she was present at I believe it was a wedding in which Henry Clay received news that he had lost one of his presidential elections.
Uh,
I think it's interesting that the person who's recording that is actually Mary's stepmother. So again, women still had an interest in politics, even
mhm,
if maybe they weren't, you know, voting. Um,
mhm.
so yeah, they definitely knew each other. There's stories that Mary used to ride her pony up to Ashland to visit Clay. Now, the veracity of those stories cannot be proven, but they're
Yeah,
later family stories. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's a high probability that that would have happened at some point. So with, the house itself, um, and this was during Mary's, teenage years, as you had said, and well, actually, where else in Lexington did they live before that?
Mhm.
And I assume there's not no those buildings are no longer standing, but, um
Correct. So she was born about a block and a half from here. So I can probably walk there in about 5 minutes. Up on Short Street. We're all located on Main Street. And her birthplace, they moved out of whenever, so she was born in 1818. They moved out of there around 1832 to move over to here. Her mother had passed away when she was just 6 years old, and her father had remarried, and he remarried a woman named, or married a woman named Betsy Humphreys Todd, and they expanded their family. So there were 7 children from Robert and Eliza's marriage. That's Mary's parents. And then 6 were alive at the time that the stepmother joined the family. And then she proceeded to start to have a lot of children too. She eventually had 9 children. So they had this growing family. They move out of the Short Street property and move here, which is a larger property. It also had more land, although we were still in the city, but room for a garden and things like that. So they moved here when she was 13. Her birthplace was demolished a very, very long time ago. There's now an older home on the property, but it's a new old home, if you will. It's a place. Yeah.
Um, well, that's it's interesting progression wise how well, just tell us a little bit more about the house. Like, what can people expect, or if you're driving down Main Street, where maybe they can spot it out.
Yeah. So we are on Main Street in Lexington. We are a part of downtown and have always been a part of downtown, but we're on the west end of downtown. So we are on the stretch between Oliver Lewis Way and Broadway. We are actually the 2 things that abut us are Main Street Baptist Church and the Convention Center. So we are next to 2 very large structures, which I think makes our house look a little bit smaller than it actually is, because it's about 5,500 square feet. And
Wow.
yeah, and
That-
it was originally built as an inn in the early 1800s prior to the Todd family purchasing it. So it operated as a commercial property for about 25 years before the Todd family moved in. So yeah, right on downtown Main Street. That's where we're
mhm.
at. What can people expect whenever they visit us? Well, they have access to the first and second floor. The third floor is just a little garret. That's actually where I am now. I don't know if you can tell, but the ceiling, like that wallpaper is like the height of the wall up against the
Mhm.
wall because it's just we're in the garret. I'm in the and in the eaves right now of the house. So that's what they don't see is these 2 little teeny rooms up here that are our offices now. We focus on actually Mary's whole life. We don't just talk about her childhood and youth. We kind of touch on her entire biography from cradle to grave.
Yeah, I would assume a lot of people come in there to learn about Lincoln, or that's maybe their first connection. But there's a whole lot more to her story as well. Um, I got the gallery here pulled up on the uh, website. This is the exterior, and I bring it up because I went to college. I lived in Lexington for 2 3 years or so, and if I didn't know or hadn't looked it up myself, driving down Main Street, you would not notice, or say, "Oh, look, there's Mary Todd Lincoln's house." You would not, as you said, the buildings beside it can kind of overshadow a little bit. Uh, um, but it is a lot bigger house than you would expect it to be, I guess.
It is. Another thing that sometimes people have a misconception about is because quite obviously now there's all this modern era construction around us. Um, they think that maybe at one point we were located in the country and that the city has built up around us. And that is not the case. This has always been a townhome, a part of downtown Lexington and within the city limits. So
Mhm.
again, Mary Lincoln grew up in an urban environment. She grew up in a city. She was a city gal. And that's kind of an interesting contrast to what people think of someone growing up in early Kentucky. You don't really think of them as being
Yeah.
some of the city folks. And she was definitely a city person.
hmm Now, so this picture here is the family parlor. This would be where Henry Clay came and sat, right?
He might have been there, but he might have been in the more formal parlors across the way. The family parlor is actually my favorite room in the house.
hmm
Um, so I don't know if you can zoom in, but or you might have to increase your screen to
There
do
we
so.
go.
So this family parlor is interesting. You think of okay, this is the informal area. They sit around. They might be having conversation, playing cards, games. But the prints above the mantle are are original to the house. They and they're in their original frames. And we have, of all people, Admiral Lord Nelson and Sir Walter Scott. I
Hmm.
mean, you think, these are not Kentucky figures, but this is to speak to how worldly they were. Um,
Okay.
the Todd family probably acquired these prints as a part of a subscription to a newspaper called the Albion, which was a newspaper that talked. I mean, it had arts, culture, but it had politics in it as well. I think it was published in New York, I believe so.
Mhm.
So they had the subscription, and one of the things you could add on was to buy these prints of various famous historical figures, and they chose these. So they weren't just reading the local paper, which they did. They would have subscribed to our local papers, but they were also obviously getting periodicals from other areas and keeping abreast of what was going on in the world.
That is pretty interesting, and also interesting that that happened. I didn't know that that was a thing. You could rent or subscribe to newspapers and get historical pictures. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, also when Abraham and Mary Lincoln were married, living in Springfield, they subscribed to a Lexington paper. So she, I assume it's her, wanted to keep
Mhm.
abreast of what was happening in Lexington, and she got the Lexington paper sent to her in Springfield.
Wow. Well, that's pretty interesting. Um, so let's see. Here more in the dining room.
Yeah, so we're in the family parlor looking into the dining room.
Mhm. Let's see. Oh, is it? This is the actual dining room. There we go.
This is the dining room. So we actually have a lot of interesting pieces. Or obviously, I'm biased. I think they're interesting throughout the house. The candelabra there are some of the more unique ones in that they were given to us by Abraham and Mary Lincoln's last living descendant. His name was Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith. Purportedly, these candelabras belonged to Abraham and Mary Lincoln, according to him. Um, it's difficult to prove it beyond what he said.
Yeah.
And he died in the 1980s, and he left us or gave us a number of pieces that we have in the house um, that are pieces that are directly connected to the Lincolns.
What is the one back here? The silverish ones?
Are,
Those
are,
look
you,
pretty fancy.
are you referring to the thing that's in a case? It looks like it's in a clear case. It's under the
Yes, right.
portrait.
Yes.
That's a tea set.
Ah,
Now, that tea set actually belonged to Mary Todd Lincoln's stepmother. It's original,
mhm.
and we returned it to the house a couple of years ago via descendant. The interesting thing about that, oh, and you have to bear with me, Jameson. Mary Todd Lincoln's dad died very suddenly in 1849.
Mhm.
And while he was trained in the law, he did not actually have a legally binding will. He made a deathbed will, but it wasn't properly witnessed, and so it was
Yeah.
challenged. So to sell his estate, everything was sold to be liquidated. Well, in that era, almost everything is going to be considered his property in the house.
Yeah.
This tea set is one of the few things that was not considered his property. It was owned by her stepmother, who had inherited land. Um, and the land was sold, and then the money was put into the tea set, and it was inscribed to market specifically as her property.
Oh, wow.
So it actually became a part of a dispute. One of Mary's stepbrothers brings up the tea set, and she has to defend herself and argue why it didn't have to be sold and it was hers. So, I mean,
Mm.
it's kind of interesting that she literally had to make sure she inscribed it as her
Yeah.
property to make sure that this would not be subject later
Mhm.
to being considered her husband's property.
Um, well, that is pretty fascinating that that level of, detail had to be done. Um, now, side note here, what happened to Mary's, mother? Her
Oh,
biological mother?
yeah, very, very important. So, Mary's mother, Eliza Parker Todd, um, married her father and then proceeded to start having a lot of babies, as
Mhm.
happens. Mary was
Mhm.
their fourth child, and then she went on to have a couple more. And right after the birth of the seventh child, Eliza experienced it was probably an infection, and she died within a matter of days of his birth. So she died relatively young due to childbirth complications, as was all too common in that era. And there are no images of her because she died so young. She died well before the advent of photography, and her portrait had never been painted. So very little is actually known about Eliza, unfortunately, apart from that she was the daughter of a very prominent family. We know something about them. She
Hmm.
likely, though, was probably educated at a female academy in Lexington, and she was of the class that would have happened.
Yeah.
So she was probably well educated as well. But she did die, unfortunately.
Hmm.
So that Mary was 6 years old at the time that her mother passed away. And her father remarried about a year and a half later, and that's when she gained her stepmother.
Hmm. And so total siblings. What would her total siblings be? Um,
So I'm going to give you the total numbers, including her. Okay,
okay, yeah.
7 from the first marriage, and that includes Mary,
Hmm.
one of whom died.
Hmm.
There were 9 born to her stepmother, one of whom died. So there were 16 total, 14 of whom lived to adulthood, and that includes
Yeah.
Mary.
Wow.
So there's this huge age gap between the oldest and youngest. We're talking
Yeah.
about 30 years between the oldest and
Yeah.
the siblings. I mean, Mary's and Abraham's oldest son, Robert, is just a few years younger or around, than some of Mary's
Hmm.
siblings,
Yeah. Yeah.
around the same age.
Yeah.
I think the other interesting thing, if I can, I just keep going
Yeah.
off,
Oh, you're
Jason,
good.
is that Mary's family, she had a step parent. She had
Hmm.
half siblings. They were what today we would consider like a blended family.
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln also, his mother died. He gained a stepmother, a blended family. Sometimes we just don't think of in the past that there were uh, blended families, these families where, there's step parents and step siblings and half siblings. But
Hmm.
that was very common in that era due to death, to disease or childbirth or you know so it's a part of the past that sometimes we don't think about, like
Yeah.
blended families.
Yeah. 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 It happened a lot. I mean, you think it's 16 kids total. Oh man, that is a lot. A whole lot. I have 3, and I feel like my hands are full. So, welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.